Okay. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I was sick the last class. Um, just a minute. Okay. So I enlarged the screen so you can see me when I start, and then we will move on to the subject of today's recording. So I'm sorry I have to record this class. Actually, I don't know if you prefer recording or we could actually have a makeup class, but I thought it would be hard to arrange a time which is suitable for all of us. I mean, actually, I'm quite flexible, but for you, I thought it would be difficult to arrange another time. So I thought maybe it's better to record a lecture so that you can watch it at the comfort of your homes. So yeah, and I will see you the following week, and then we can discuss what to do if something like that occurs again. Okay, now let's start with the class, and I will share the screen and I will open my presentation, which is about prehistoric art. So today we are gonna talk about this. My cat is kind of distracting me about this very early period in history, which is the beginning of human civilization, at least as the humans that we know. So I forgot the exact terminology, but I think human history starts with Homo erectus. So Neanderthal were different than Homo erectus. So Homo erectus starts the prehistoric art. As far as I remember, I might be wrong. So you should check this information. So today we are going to talk about two different periods. One of them is Paleolithic art, which is the very early part of the prehistoric art, from 30,000 to 10,000 BCE. At this period of time, we don't have any settlements, pretty much. No, not many not any remains of any towns. These people are nomadic. They are mostly hunter-gatherers. So they don't have, maybe they have small settlements, but they don't leave trace, and because they don't do farming, they don't settle in a certain place, but instead they just move from one place to the other. So, and in the second part, which is from 9,000 to 5,000 BC, people start to settle. So we have actual remains of villages such as Göbekli Tepe, or we have, for instance, this very famous I forgot, confuse the names. I was trying to say Çatalhöyük. We have Çatalhöyük, which is a village, and we have Göbekli Tepe, which is a temple, which that's what the function is thought to be. So, I mean, throughout this presentation, we are going to focus on three questions. What caused people to create art? How can we interpret artworks from such an early period? And in which way prehistoric artworks are different from our contemporary notion of art? So actually, this is a very important question, the last one, or because it asks us to look at this period with fresh eyes. So we shouldn't try to impose as much as we can our notions of what is art, what is human, even, what are their priorities in life, what are their values. These people are very different from us. They are more in a sense more I don't know if I'm not sure if I should use the word primitive, but this is one of the terms that is being used to describe this period and this people. But it also has a pejorative connotation, primitive. So I'm not really keen on using this term because, in some ways they might be primitive. Their technology is very primitive compared to us, but they might be very wise, or they might be very, more advanced in certain aspects compared to us. So, that's another issue to think about. So they have a very different idea of, probably art. And I don't know if they do art as we do, such as, uh, for decoration, for commercial purposes. They definitely don't do it for commercial purposes because they don't have money at that time period. So their art should be more true to themselves because they don't do it for money, but they do it just to express themselves or to communicate with people, maybe to decorate the places that they inhabit, because we have paintings from that period. But definitely, or sometimes for magical purposes, they may be creating art to help them with the hunting. So it could be more vital to their daily life. So it is very different from our notion of art. That's what I'm trying to say. So we try to, as much as we can throughout this course, to forget our prejudices about what art is and try to look these works from the viewpoint of primitive people, in quote. Okay, so we are looking at the map of Mediterranean, and because most of the places I will talk about are around the Mediterranean, and some of them I will just name you so that you remember. Maybe is Lascaux, very famous cave paintings come from Lascaux. We have Karnak, that are monumental stones, comes from here. We have Stonehenge, very famous place for this monument, again with kind of clock-like arrangement. And where else we are going to talk about? We are going to talk about this very famous little sculpture, Women of Willendorf, comes from Czech Republic or Austria. And then there are some sites in Spain. Altamira is famous. I didn't heard Brasemoti or Kogul, but whatever. They are, I assume, kind of similar to, France, to the sites in France. And we also have, of course, actually sites from Turkey, which we are going to talk about. Çatalhöyük. I will show you some pictures from Çatalhöyük. And I will also maybe show you some other examples that I don't remember now. So we will see them as the lecture unfolds. Okay. So we are looking at our very first and very famous Women of Willendorf. She comes from Austria and she's very early, dates to the beginning of prehistoric period, 28 to 25,000 BC. And it's a very small limestone sculpture. It's approximately 41.4 feet high. I mean, so I know that you are not probably familiar with feet. So you don't need to know the feet, but you should know that this woman fits into palm of a hand. So she's very small, So when we look at this sculpture, what do we see? If we were in the classroom, I would ask this question to you, and I would like you to answer it. But since you are not here, I'll answer it myself. So this woman has beads on her face. So she doesn't have a face, in other words, which means that she's not a person. She's a genre, we would say. She's a character, but not a person. So she is not something made as a sculpture of a human being, but as a general idea of woman, maybe, a concept of woman. So the concept of woman at that period of time, we can try to understand it by looking at this woman. So she has big breasts and she has big belly. Her pubis is emphasized. She has thick legs. So this, this physical features suggest us that this woman might be a sex symbol, maybe. Why not? Or she could be a fertility figure, or she could be both, actually. So, we don't really know because we don't have any writing from this period. In the prehistoric period, They don't have any text, so they were not able to express themselves with written word, but instead they actually left us these artifacts which we are now struggling to interpret. So anyways, to show you actually a comparison to make it more maybe clear or maybe more confusing, what kind of a woman Venus of Willandorf could be. Actually, she's not even a Venus, but they called her Venus because initially they thought, the scholars thought she might be a goddess, that's why they call her Greek name Venus, but she's not actually Venus. She's a woman from prehistoric period of time. And I put this comparison up with Marilyn Monroe because she's also the sex symbol of a contemporary kind. So maybe you can compare her in some sense to women of Willandorf, because Marilyn Monroe becomes an icon. She's not a person. Actually, we know her life story, of course, but she becomes such a well-known figure that she becomes a no person, nobody in a sense. So that's why she's an icon, a generic figure, a character symbolizing, sexual role of women, maybe. So one big difference, of course, or one big, contrast, we would say, how the ideal beauty of each period of time can change, and it can change very fast, actually. So we are living in a world where women are acceptable if they are thin, but in the prehistoric time they were maybe more acceptable. They were acceptable if they are fat, because this fatness was a luxury. Not many people have it, because at that period of time, as I said, people were nomads, so they didn't live a life dedicated to sitting. So they were probably moving all the time. They have a lot of work to do during their daily life. So they didn't have an opportunity to actually gain weight. So gaining weight was a privilege, actually, probably. That's how they interpreted scholars. So in that sense, there's a huge contrast between the prehistoric figure and the contemporary figure, how we value the beauty, how we judge the beauty of women. But the emphasis on sexual organs, maybe we could say similar, but of course with the Venus of Willandorf, her sexuality is geared towards fertility, her ability of giving childbirth. On the other hand, with Marilyn Monroe, we don't have such a function attached to her sexuality. Instead, I think contemporary people find her sexy regardless of she can give birth or not. So that's another huge difference. And because this fertility issue was probably critical to the life of prehistoric people, because they thought the fertility of women is connected with the fertility of the land, which kind of determines their life conditions, because if they cannot find fruits or vegetables, if they cannot find animals to eat, so they will die. So it was a life that situation for them. So the fertility of the earth was a life that matter. So that's why it was connected with the fertility of the women, and it was symbolized in a sculptural form. So in that sense, maybe she's similar to a Russian doll. Maybe some of you know these dolls. They are like smaller dolls inside the big one. So again, this idea of fertility is, given expression in a sculptural form, and in a very unique Russian way, which is, of course, again, very different from our women of Willandorf. So some may also think that then this women of Willandorf can be a toy, maybe, for children, or it can be a magic magic symbol, like they would use to ensure the fertility of the owner, maybe something like that. So that could be the purpose of this artwork, but it's definitely not its commercial value like we have today, or maybe it's beauty in a quotation, So we don't know if they find this figure beautiful or if they judge people or things as ugly or beautiful. We don't even know that because, as I said, they don't have any writing from that period. So this is the beginning of our lecture, as we move on to other artworks, we will continue with these themes that are important to prehistoric people. So this is another sculpture similar to Women of Willendorf. Here we see a woman holding a bison horn. This is again from France, close to Women of Willendorf. We see this is a relief sculpture. It's different than the statuettes that we looked at before, because the statuette was freestanding, or at least, she doesn't have feet, but she's a three-dimensional sculpture. We can hold it on your hand, but the other one is actually attached to a wall. So we call this kind of art as relief sculpture. So she's painted originally, but of course we don't see the colors at the moment, but we see the lines of her, again, breasts, we see her belly, we see her hips and her pubis, again, emphasized. And in addition to her sexual features, we also have a horn in her hand, which kind of, again, a symbol of male fertility. So this figure kind of combines both symbols in one form. Both the female fertility figure, she's a female fertility figure, and she also makes a reference to male fertility with the bison horn. So again, we see her face is not visible, it's damaged. So we can say that, again, this is not a particular person, but this is an idea or a concept of a woman which is expressing the idea of fertility, which is, again, as I said, a life-death issue for the livelihood of primitive people. Okay. So this is another example of an artwork from France. It's made up of clay. Here we see two bisons. This is also a relief sculpture, and it's from a cave in France. This is much later, actually, 13,000 BC. Again, caves are important settlements for primitive people. Not necessarily they use them as homes, and we don't know that these examples that I'm going to show you today, for instance, this cave is probably not being used as a home, but instead it could be a place of worship. So how do we know that? I don't know the layout of this cave, but the ones that I will show you later are actually caves which are very deep. So they are not really very suitable to be used as a house or a living area, but instead they are actually, we assume that they are ceremonial because they are approached in a very difficult way, so you don't just run into a cave like this, but you have to walk maybe 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers inside the cave to find this spot. So this shows us that, or tells us that, this is a ceremonial spot, because you wouldn't go there every day, probably, And, if you remember how the experience could be, walking in a cave, it's actually not very easy because the ground is not flat and you don't have light. So you have to carry torches in order to reach here. And you would be scared probably to go alone. So you would also need company. You know, you would don't go there by yourself, but you would probably go there with people. So that already makes it a community engagement, you know, walking into the deep recesses of caves in order to maybe perform a ceremony. You know, what kind of ceremony is that? We don't know, but we consider this artworks to be part of a ceremony or remains of a ceremony, religious ceremony, a ritual. You know, that's one of the keywords for today. So what is a ritual? We will talk about it more with the following examples. But before moving on, I like to talk about the bisons, you know, because as you see, bisons are powerful animals and they are, I'm not sure actually if they are being killed for their meat, probably, you know, so that this nomadic people would be able to access meat. So they are powerful and they are, you know, as you see, so shown as in a very expressive manner, you know. So this relief sculptures, they show us a very vibrant bison, you know. It shows its animal spirit in a sense. And you know, I don't know if you ever tried to, you know, sculpt anything. I don't think so, but if you do, even if you draw a bison, try to draw a bison, you would see that it's not easy actually to capture the correct proportions and capture the actual form of the animal on paper or on a two-dimensional or three-dimensional surface. So it's difficult. So in order to do that, you should be skilled, you know, or you should do it several times before, so that you reach an actual idea of what a bison looks like. You know, that's why painters like drove several years in order to acquire that skill of drawing one animal with one line. So we see this in this image, this kind of an expertise, you know, this ability to convey the dynamic form of animal in a very simplistic manner, as I said, which is very difficult to do actually. So that makes us question, you know, who were the artists and how they were able to execute such talented, you know, or such beautifully drawn communicative forms. I'm using the word beautiful not only to not to actually convey a kind of a standard, but actually to express how real, you know, how authentic the animal is, you know, how it actually draws a certain characteristic from the original form, so that it conveys us the true information about this animal. I mean, so I don't know, the beautiful is not about the beauty of the lines or about the I mean, I don't know how you will express beauty, but it's about, as I said, it's about truth of the animal's form, let's say. Okay, so let's move on. So yeah, I mean, this animal bison brings us to the question of who are the artists at this period of time, you know. So this is a caricature actually, which kind of teases us probably again about how we look at neoclassic, I'm sorry, primitive art or prehistoric art, because it makes us question who is the artist for us and who was the artist for them. You know, they probably didn't have a different class or profession called artist. Probably, we don't know, but because they were, as I said, nomads, and everybody was kind of living the same lifestyle. So they didn't have this division of jobs probably that we have now. So they pretty much all do the same thing. You know, they all hunt, they all cook, they all maybe draw. You know, they all sculpt. So this is not a profession in a sense that we know it. So this is just a caricature showing us, you know, how it is a strange thing actually when you think about it. All because all people can create art, but we have a profession called artists. You know, all buildings can create, or all people can create architecture. You know, which they do in the past. You know, everybody built their own house, or maybe mostly guys. You know, but sometimes women also help or build. You know, houses. So, but now we have it as a profession, which was like a everyday practice for ordinary people in the past. So, as I said, let me give a short break, and then I will come back. Okay, so we stopped at Chauvet Cave, which is a very old cave, again, 28,000 BC from France. As you see, it's a huge cave. You know, from the map, you can see like this distance is 1 to 10, I think, kilometers or meters. Sorry, it's meters, I guess. So how deep it is, you can see actually. It's quite deep. So 1 meter is like a little bit of uh, this diagram. So it's actually, you know, quite deep with areas that are painted. So all these are arrows, they show us this important spots where we have the painted figures of animals. So for instance, here we have the horses and maybe the bisons at the same time. I think these are bisons. So here you see again like superimposed animals. So they show us multiple figures. This actually is discussed whether they are trying to represent a group of animals like a herd, you know, or whether these images were actually drawn at different times on top of each other. I think the second idea was thought to be more truthful, because they drove over this cave surface several times. So I mean, we know that there's not just one instance of painting, but different maybe groups of people, or maybe the same group of people came here to paint. So again, we have a very vibrant form of the animal. In addition to the line drawings, we also have shading, which again gives us a three-dimensionality of the animal, so we can understand how they are shaped or sculpted. Another feature of these paintings that help us to understand its three-dimensionality is the cave surface. Of course, we are not looking at a flat, smooth surface, but instead we are looking at the curvilinear or convex surface, and very irregular surface actually. So this surface is also used by the artists to express the volumetric dimension of the animals that are being drawn. Let's move on, look at the next one. Here, similarly, we have a bear and we have a horse. Both of them are drawn at a certain location at the cave, which kind of suits the form of the animal. You know, here you have this this swollen swollen surfaces, which give us a sense of the swollen body of a bear, you know, as chunky chunky body of a bear. And as you see, we have just one line, so there is no erasure, or there is no, you know, probably way to correct the line if they draw wrongly. So they draw it in a very confident way, you know, and they do it in a very expressive way, and they show us the actual volume and image of the animal, which is, again, as I said, very truthful to the form of the animal. And likewise, here we have this horse, which is drawn very, you know, both very vibrantly and in a very fast impression. You know, it creates such a fast impression, that line, as if it's drawn in one time. So it gives us this very dynamic, vibrant feeling of this animal. Okay, here we have more animals. We have an owl, we have a mammoth, and we have a rhinoceros, which are, again, are very impressionistic, very expressive animals. They are showing us also the movement of the animal, maybe. So these animals are not, of course, always being eaten by the people in the prehistoric times. So they probably didn't eat mammoths, or they probably didn't eat at all. So these animals are probably drawn for their, you know, again, we don't know for which purposes, but either for communicative purposes or for ritualistic purposes, which we don't really know. And here we have spotted horses. Here we also have handprints. And this handprints shows us that they were actually blowing pigments by putting their hand on the wall and then blowing pigment with a pipe. They were creating these images. And at the lower hand, we have the horses created by, again, hands, spots created by, you know, people by putting the spots on the wall. And here we have another hand. So there are also hands of children. So from this, we understand that this is not a grown-up event only. So the children are also included in this game or in this ceremony, whatever it is. So this is another very famous cave, which is in Lascaux in France. And this is a little bit earlier than, or actually a lot earlier, closer to our time than the Lascaux previous cave, Chauvet cave. So this dates to 15,000 to 13,000 BC, and it's an important one because we have, for the first time, a human figure being drawn here, and we will look at it. And also in this cave, we also have some traces of human architecture. Let's say this house seems to be shaped by humans, or this cave, you know, at least we have this path, and then we have the stairs, which kind of creates actually room, a path inside the room, let's say, and then this very dramatic entrance towards the Hall of Bulls, because it's created on the wall. We have these pictures of the bulls. So we will look at both images, but as I said before we move on to with the paintings, I just wanted to remind you that this event was part of a ceremony, since I was telling you since the beginning of class, and we call these ceremonies rituals. You know, so a ritual can be anything. Like it can be tea drinking ceremony. It can be a ritual, and it can be a religious ceremony, like going to the mosque or namaz, or a ceremony like this. You know, that you see whirling dervishes. This can be a ritual. So the difference from an everyday event, let's say eating food, eating something could be ritual. For instance, a wedding dinner could be ritualistic. It's not like a normal evening, for instance, that you eat at home by yourself, but when you eat it with a group for a wedding, to celebrate the wedding of a couple, etc., it becomes like a ritual. So, uh, maybe I'll ask you to do some exercise about ritual at the end of this class, and maybe you can find more, occasions now you think about what a ritual is. So, as I said, the scholars who are working on prehistoric people consider these paintings as part of a ritual or remains of a ritual. People would go to these caves, which are kind of far away from their daily life because we know mostly live outdoors in open air. And in order to go there, they have to walk quite a bit in a dark cave, which is not probably very safe to walk. And then they come here and paint, for what reason, we don't know. Probably to communicate with these animals, their spirits, maybe ask them to ask the gods or the animals to help them with their hunting, or to create a kind of magic which will help them with hunting. These are all the possible scenarios, but of course we don't exactly know what the real purpose is. So here we have, again, like superimposed animals drawn on top of each other, the bulls which exist in this cave in Lascaux. And the most important, here we have more details of the bulls. And here we have also, other animals. And here we have a horse from the Lascaux cave. And you see how similar it is to an actual Chinese horse. And again, we see use of color to give a sense of the volumetric quality of the horse. And, I brought these images to show how different actually is the style of prehistoric people, because here, there is the shape of a horse. We call this type of drawing as stylized, because here the shape of horse is turned into a pattern. This is stylized drawing. So here instead we don't have such a pattern, but we have a more naturalistic approach. So we call it naturalism, but this one is a stylized drawing of a horse. And this is an abstract. The cave paintings are abstract drawings in a sense, because they don't give us actual, sense of the animal. Like we don't see, for instance, the hair of the bull. We don't actually have any details of the arm, as his musculature of the arm, or legs are not being expressed. So abstract art actually become very popular after 1910s, 1920s, with modern figures like Pablo Picasso. This is a drawing by Picasso. And they are actually inspired by prehistoric art. These people, the modern artists in 1910s, were looking at prehistoric or so-called primitive art in order to create this sense of vibrancy that they think is missing of 19th century art. So, for instance, this also shows you how difficult abstraction can be. That's why I actually brought this image, because, for instance, Picasso starts with a very naturalistic looking image of a bull. He draws all the details, like his, belly, legs, his, I forgot the word, whatever, you'll remember this, tail. and his, shoulders, etc. So shading gives us an impression of the three-dimensionality of the image. So here we have even more complete image of a bull, it's more three-dimensional, more expressive. But what he does is he gradually, okay, so that I move myself so that you can see the image better. So he gradually actually finds geometric points that give us the sense of its shape. So he kind of geometricized the bull. And then he even gets rid of this geometry and he makes it very simple towards the end. So in order to reach this image, which is again not a very true looking bull, but a very Picasso image. So it creates this whole series of drawings, so I'm showing you this image to give you an idea of how difficult abstraction is, because you don't just start and draw an animal. Instead, you work on the details and then you get rid of the details in order to create this perfect line. So that's why it was very impressive for artists to look at this primitive artwork, because we know how difficult it is to draw an animal like that. And we wouldn't be able to do it before studying a lot, because probably we are very far from the life of these animals. We don't see them in our daily life. We don't kind of give a big importance to them in our daily life. Again, we eat them, but we don't even know how they live, where they come from. We actually only see them in, zoos or maybe at the documentaries on the TV. So we are several steps away from actually animal life. But these people were actually living with these animals, and these animals were very important to their livelihood, as I said, because they could be killed by these animals, or they need to hunt these animals so that they can survive, So that's why they have a very intimate relationship with these animals. And that's how they probably know how to draw them well. So here, as I said, is a very striking image, this human figure we have, and again with a bison. And when we look at this image, and here he also have a duck-headed spear, a stick spear, something like a baston. So that's why we think maybe he's a priest, he's a religious figure, or he's a magician, he's someone important in the society. But despite his kind of symbolic significance or religious significance, and we also see his penis, by the way, so this is an also important detail, but he's being beaten by the bison, and another important, contrast between the bison and the figure is there's the craftsman attention being paid to the figures, so we see that bison is very expressively drawn like the previous animals we've seen. So it's very powerful. We see the strength, we feel the strength of the animal from the drawing. But the stick figure, it doesn't even have any three-dimensionality, any musculature. He's like a Ginelli, he's like a stick figure. He doesn't have the expressiveness of the bison. So that's why it also shows us how these people considers themselves as human, how weak they consider their, species, as opposed to these animals, how powerful they are being perceived by prehistoric man. So I think this was the last image that I'm going to show you from prehistoric period, and I will upload the following lecture with another video. So I will stop here and continue with another video where we talk about Neolithic